a special guest. Please welcome to the show, Toni Moss. Toni, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fun to be here. We're gonna play Scrabble without the vowels.
You know what? I'm down for that. And you know what I'm even more down for, Toni, right now?
What?
I'm down for what I call a yoga laugh. Have you ever done a yoga laugh before?
No.
Do you know what one is?
No.
I'm so amazed that nobody knows what yoga laughs are. That's why I'm going to popularize them on this show. So a yoga laugh is where you force yourself to laugh as hard as you possibly can. I'll demonstrate, and then we can do it together. Are you down?
I'm down.
All right. So this is a yoga laugh. That's like one yoga laugh. All right. So we're going to do 3. You ready to do 3?
Ready.
All right. 1, 2, 3.
Very becoming. What are we laughing at?
Nothing. That's just the act of laughing. Wait, is your camera turned sideways?
No.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're looking away. Perfect. No, I'm a part of this. I have a CEO forum I'm in, and we do a yoga laugh before we start our meetings, and it's kind of a fun thing to do.
Well, it certainly makes everybody else laugh.
Yeah, you can't help but laugh when someone does it, and then it also you get a nice little rush. It loosens you up a little bit. So I decided I'm going to popularize it on the show. So you're welcome. You're now initiated.
Yay! Sorry, I'm sitting in the dark.
No, you're good. Your lighting's fine. So guys, let me just go over a few things. Look, the format of the show is very, very simple. It's really that we're trying to bring change makers, people with great ideas, people that have really done amazing things to create greatness in the world. And we want them to share that with you guys so you can learn and I can learn and we all can learn together. And a couple things about live streaming. We are live. So start a watch party, like comments, ask questions. My team is standing by to answer any questions. But more importantly than that, let's get to Miss Toni Moss herself. So I'm going to say this because I feel like I'm so fortunate. I get to live next door to Toni Moss. So we're live streaming next door to one another right now. And you're like, Darius, you're live streaming your next door neighbor. And I'm like, yeah, if you live next door to Toni Moss, she'd be the first person you'd ask to be on your show. And secondly, you would live stream with her, but like in 2 seconds. So yes, I am live streaming with my next door neighbor right now. I'm going to tell you why. She is arguably the most inspiring and connected person I know in the entire United States of America. She's connected with think tanks, the political establishment, movers and shakers all over the United States. Her sweet spot's in the realm of housing, but don't let that deceive you. This isn't like some talk about doing a loan at a mortgage shop. This is like highest level of housing. Toni's a force to be reckoned with, and she's probably one of the most interesting people I've ever met. Look, she has amazing ideas. We do coffee like at my house where I'm just like, no, Toni, will you just come over at least like every couple weeks so we can do coffee and I can just like learn some amazing stuff from you. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Toni.
Thank you. This can be fun.
So what have you been up to? I mean, we haven't talked in a couple weeks, but what's going on? What's up in your world?
I'm working on a property development called Digital Ridge. Oh. It's predicated on the fact that how we live has changed, but the way that we build hasn't changed at all. And I think that where you live should help you make a living and the way that communities are designed. And so I'm working on that, and I'm putting together content for the National Fair Housing Alliance event, which is going to be huge. It's all about disparate impact, racism in housing, and how it's leading to a dystopian society. And then I had a new idea that I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think that we need to build more participatory communities, because I don't think that we can rely on support from monopolistic businesses or the government. And okay. So the only way we're going to survive is to create our own tribes. So I'm trying to figure out how to operationalize that.
Yeah, that's funny. Like that's kind of my buddy Anton. He's working on a little bit of that too. And I think you guys have met before, but let's jump into that. But so let me ask you a question, because I think you're kind of touching on something that I firmly believe as well. And I think, I haven't expressed this on the show, but I'll say it out loud right now, is my belief is that here we are, what, 10, 11 years after the last financial crisis, and the whole world's gotten commoditized again. People are getting laid off. Healthcare is an issue. We have a wider discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots than we've ever had before. And we have some major political issues going on in our country. So, what do you think the world needs now to fix that? Because I have my thoughts, but I want to hear yours.
We need a new enlightenment. And what I mean by that is today, everything in the world and humanity is inextricably wed. And if you look at what happened economically in 2007 and 8, you called it a crisis. I refuse to call it a crisis, because that would imply a beginning and an end. And the fact is, the world just changed, and we've been trying to adapt to it because it never ended. And I think what it's leading to is really rethinking capitalism. So basically, with regard to the entanglement, right, this new enlightenment, right, the Enlightenment was 3 centuries ago, and that was when we came up with all of our ideals, democracy, capitalism, independence, rational thought, science. And we've outgrown a lot of those ideals. So, our economic models are nothing more than grand social experiments. And we know that communism has failed. We know that socialism has, for the most part, failed. And I would argue that the implosion of the housing markets in 2007 and 8 proved that capitalism has failed. When I say that, everybody goes, "What are you, a socialist?" And no, even at Davos, they're talking about restructuring this malignant form of capitalism. Right. And actually we have socialism for the rich and capitalism for everyone else. So, the housing implosion wasn't the perfect storm. It was economic climate change. And you touched on income inequality, which, in addition to climate change, that's the greatest challenge of our lifetime. So last thing about the entanglement is that what it calls for is cooperation and collaboration and compromise. And those are all dirty words in American vernacular. And, this global shift toward nationalism is backwards, it's destructive, and it's ultimately dystopian. And it's really fascism coming back. It's neo-fascism.
Yeah, so it's funny. I have a friend that was on the show last week, and he introduced me to this guy by the name of Jeff Booth. And Jeff Booth, I don't remember the name of his book. It's a book that just came out, and it kind of talks about a lot of this stuff. And what his position is that we have been promoting monetary policy that's been promoting essentially inflation, and that's how the central banks have operated. But yet, if you look at where the money is going to creating technology that creates deflationary environments. If you look at all these technologies, all they're doing is cutting the fat out, making things more efficient, lowering costs. Yet we are pushing inflation through lowering interest rates and by essentially allowing access to very cheap and ready capital in the form of credit. And that is exacerbating the issue of what you're talking about, essentially socialism for the rich and capitalism for everybody else, because who has access to cheap credit is the rich, and everyone else is basically on the receiving end of that. And if you add into that essentially there's a very large argument, Andrew Yang made this argument, and when you hear him make it, he's really articulate about it, that we are not going to create enough jobs to replace, like with Moore's law, where technology doubles at every 18 months, that essentially if we're doubling from an already fast speed, it's like a Ferrari going from 200 to 400 to 800 to 1600 to 3200 miles an hour. If we're doubling from 3200 to 6400 miles an hour, that's way different than doubling from 400 to 800 miles an hour. And that essentially through machine learning and artificial intelligence, you're not going to have enough jobs for everybody. And so how do you fix those things?
Yeah, McKinsey did a study a couple of years ago that found that 45% of current jobs are going to be obsolete by 2027. So it's going to happen really fast. But that's exactly why Silicon Valley is talking about universal basic income.
Right. Well, and they're the ones, you know, and to your point, I think that there's the words you used before, which I find to be fascinating words that people get upset about: collaboration and compromise. Right? Yeah. Like, are we seriously? And I don't want to make this super political, but you know, our politicians are the antithesis of those words. They have been over the last probably 50 to 100 years, and it's gotten worse and worse every single year. And I mean, I'm now 42 years old, and I can never remember feeling this disgusted by our politics. And so it's when you have the leaders not stepping up and doing what's called leading, then to your point, we as a tribe need to fix it on the ground ourselves. So how do you see that happening?
Honestly, I mean, I work in an industry that's predominantly Republican, so this is probably not the best thing for me to do, but why not talk about politics, right? Because the personal, everything that affects our personal lives is political. So I think the change is voting out the current administration. And, you know, everybody talks about Trump's tax returns. I want to see the results of his recent cognitive exam. I mean, seriously, I'm almost starting to feel sorry for him. I think he's got dementia. And, you know, that open mic night at the Rose Garden yesterday kind of proved it.
Well, but, you know, the argument on the other side of the fence is, like, Biden's not the sharpest tool in the shed either, right? So, like, in it, like what are we voting him out for? Like, for some, you know, I'm hearing things like, I saw a thing the other day. It's like, well, Biden's a puppet, and like Trump was on the Hannity show last week, and he's saying, well, you know, he basically almost said what you just said about Biden, and then he said, well, you know, if you know, and this is what I'm almost to the point now where I'm like, well, let's say they both have dementia, right? Let's just make it apples for apples comparison, in which I know that each side of the fence will say that neither does. But let's just say they both did, right? It's like, well, I'm voting out one guy for the other. What's the difference as far as what am I going to get that's different? From my own position is that we are the leaders of the free world, and we need to act like it, you know? Not
anymore. But, you know, I'm voting for Biden because of his cabinet appointments. I mean, you know, Biden is kind of a non-issue. But when you look at Trump's cabinet and their policies, you know, toward the environment, and I mean, seriously, every single policy I find an issue with in terms of the long-term trajectory and how it's going to work out. So I just have a lot of faith in the cabinet that Biden is going to appoint.
So, okay, so right. So let's say apples for apples, they both have dementia.
Not apples for apples.
I'm playing devil's advocate with you, right? So, because I don't like either candidate that much, but I will agree with you that you need to have a strong cabinet that's going to go get stuff done, right? Get shit done, and we can't have the level of turnover that we're having in the current cabinet if we're going to continue to make progress. And it depends on what your definition of progress is. My issue is that both parties, and so this is my question to you from a long-term perspective, is I think both parties to a certain degree have abandoned their values and have focused mostly on just attacking one another and being super partisan. And where I go, like, how do you fix that? And my position is that they work for us, right? And like, if this was an employee of your business and they were doing what these guys do, we'd fire every single one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so what's the future of politics if this is where we're at, where, you know, they can't get anything done And when they do something, it's completely based off of a partisan decision. It's not based off of what's better for the whole. And then 8 months or 8 years later or 4 years later, the next party comes in and swings the pendulum in the other direction, pisses the other guys off. 8 years later, the next guy comes back. This is like a terrible game of ping pong, you know?
Well, you know, you talked about central banks, and you know, the fact is we need to admit that central banks have lost control of monetary policy. And you have this politicization of finance, and now the politicization of science with this current administration, right?
Way.
And you know what's interesting? When we grew up, right, we admired intelligent people. We admired and aspired to be someone who was extremely well educated and to become an expert on topics. And now I think, you know, starting with Bush and certainly with Trump, there's this notion that, you know, everybody has their opinion and is an expert, and people no longer respect intellectuals or those, you know, like Fauci, who have dedicated their lives to a particular discipline, field of study. I mean, it's horrifying.
Well, and so what do you think? Let me ask you a question on this, because I think there's a responsibility from media on this, because I think that media, I think there's an incentive system that's screwed up. The internet has provided an incentive system for these guys to create sensationalism. And so the media has now been completely corrupted for the most part in varying degrees. They're politicized too, right? Where you have like, I don't even care if you're going New York Times versus, you know, Wall Street Journal. There's a political slant from all these guys.
They're commercialized more than politicized.
Right, but like their job is to report the news without to have an opinion, right? Like I go outside the United States, I go to BBC and I go to Al Jazeera because I'm like, I don't want to hear it from inside the United States, because they're trying to get someone to click a button within the United States based on their opinion so they can get ad revenue. And I look at that and I go, this is wrong, you know? And so my issue is that Fauci's a good example. Fauci, I hear more noise on social media about Fauci conspiracy theories with Bill Gates than I do about real data around what the hell is happening on COVID from a bunch of people who want to believe conspiracy theories. So now we have fringe conspiracy theories have now become fact, right? Like this stuff never would have happened before. You wouldn't even have the conduit to create it because you didn't have the internet. So I think that there is some maybe regulation around how information is given and received through mainstream media. I don't know if that's the answer, but unchecked, we have what we have today. You have an education system that's subpar. So people are not being taught to think critically about the information they're given.
Yeah, right? And they don't value education.
Right. Well, right. Well, I think people do. They just, you know, but our education system's not that great either, right? So. Right. But I mean, I don't know if I said this to you. I said, hey, if I was president of the United States, it'd be real simple. We're not allowed to talk about any settled law until we're the #1 education system in the world. Like if there's settled law, you want to talk about Roe v. Wade? Nope, not talking about that. That's settled law until we're #1 in the world, until we have the highest standard of living, until we have the strongest middle class, until we have no one living below the poverty line. When we have those 4 things, when we have the #1 healthcare system in the world, we got those 5 things. Then we go talk about settled law. This is like a company talking about the idiots that are causing a ruckus and ignoring that they're not profitable. So, you know, I don't know. I have really strong opinions that we're sitting here debating. It's like a married couple that's debating who's the worst because they won't take out the trash and their house is on fire, you know?
Yeah. It's dystopian. But I don't see one policy, not one, in the Trump administration that's leading us toward a better world. I really don't. And when you look at economic policy, we're raping the future in order to make the present look good. We're going to pay that price down the road. And, you know, the educational policy is just horrific. And, you know, look at Black Lives Matter. Right? I mean, the systemic and structural racism is unacceptable. And whatever happened to, enlightened self-interest, right? It is in our best interest to have a society where everyone has the chance to do well. It's not in our best interest to prohibit that. And so, I think that COVID is going to lead to, it's going to force rethinking social structure, rethinking economic structure.
Mhm.
There could be an actual better outcome, but I think it's going to be unbelievably horrible coming up, because this isn't going to go away for a couple of years.
Yeah,
People are going to die.
I think that we still have a lot of problems with that. And we had a scientist on yesterday that talked about that, and he knows his stuff. Well, let me ask you a question. So first of all, guys, we're live. So if you have questions, we're talking about some this is like dark stuff happening over here. We're talking about
exploding my career as we go.
No, Toni, people know and love you for your unabashed enthusiasm around the world. But if you have questions, we got around everything around what the state of the world, economy, politics, housing, the future of housing. Toni's your person to ask those questions from. So shoot them over. But let me ask you a question. I'm going to lighten things up for a second here. So if you could have dinner with anyone, Toni, I want to know who you would have dinner with.
It would be Molly Ivins or Mark Twain. And if I had to really choose one, I'd choose Molly Ivins, who unfortunately passed away. But she was the funniest writer ever besides Twain. And I was just rereading her, and one of her lines was something like this. So she says, "Not only do I want Republicans to lose elections, I want them to have a flat tire on the way home." Oh, and then she says, "My mother raised a mean kid, but certainly no hypocrites." But when I lived in Europe for 14 years, I was in Amsterdam, and it was so dark and dreary most of the time. So I would read Molly Ivins' commentaries out loud with a thick Southern accent and do my yoga laugh. But I wish she were alive today. I can only imagine what she would say about the current administration.
What what
Who would yours be?
Who would I who would I have? I don't know. I kind of feel like I'd want to have dinner with Winston Churchill or maybe JFK.
Really?
I think Winston Churchill would be so fun to get drunk with. He was like a professional drunk who was like brilliant. I don't know. I've heard some really funny stories about him. I heard there's a book about him, like him and FDR. I can't remember the name of it, but him basically living at the White House with FDR and just getting like hammered and just like them having these amazing talks. I just felt like he would have been such an interesting guy to meet. And JFK, man, he was ahead of his time. He was such a change maker, and the guy just, yeah, I don't know. Like to be pushing for the things he was pushing for at that time in America. I was not alive during that time. So, but I can only assume that it probably felt similar to what we're dealing with now. I don't know. You were pretty young then. Do you remember like how you felt?
Well, I think I was 3 or 4 years old, but I remember in nursery school, I grew up in Houston, and I remember thinking, "Oh, we killed JFK," because it happened in Texas. Anyway, yeah, and actually, I started my career as a corporate and political speechwriter.
Okay.
And I ended up writing speeches for the chairman of ITT when it was the world's largest multinational.
Okay.
And that threw me into corporate intelligence. But as a result, I read speeches all the time. And it's, especially the first and the last line. And JFK had some of the most insightful speeches of all time. If anybody wants to have extracurricular reading, it's really fascinating to read a lot of these speeches.
I wonder who, do you know, so I don't know if you know this about me, but I worked at the White House. Did you know that?
No.
Oh, you didn't know that?
Under which administration?
I worked for the Clinton administration.
Wow.
I was an intern. I was a White House intern.
Oh my God. Were you subject to sexual harassment?
You know, that's always everyone's first joke. So what's funny enough, in October of 1998, I did dress up like Monica Lewinsky for Halloween. But no, this was in summer 2000. It was his last summer before the election. And so it was what I met Bill Clinton's speechwriter, and he came and spoke to us. And I was actually, like, funny enough, I was actually president of my intern class. So I was the president of the interns. I put on all the social events for us, but we met with the speechwriter for Clinton, and he said, you know, and dude, Clinton's a Rhodes Scholar, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, everyone said, I never got one-on-one time with him because he was never there really, but everyone I know that knows him and everyone that worked there really kind of knew him because they're part of his administration. They're like, this guy is the smartest guy you're ever going to meet your whole life. And they said that his speechwriter said, you know, I'll never be able to write as good of a speech as President Clinton could write himself. But, you know, I'll try, you know? So when you're, did JFK, did he write his own speeches, or did he have, do you know who his speechwriters were?
He did write most of his own speeches because back then, nobody really thought of a speechwriter. But actually, another person who has the most hilarious speeches is Governor Ann Richards.
Real? Oh, my in-laws love her. I don't know very much about her because I'm new to Texas. But why do you think her speeches are so hilarious?
You just have to read them. I mean, you know, she would come up with lines like, you know, the bigger the hair, the closer to God. I mean, she was just hysterically funny, and I was lucky I got to provide some input on some of those speeches, but she always had the best lines.
Oh, that's cool.
I mean, it's a comedy sketch to read most of them, especially her campaign against Clayton Williams, who was this West Texas oil guy.
Oh, that's cool.
He was a real character. Anyway.
We got a couple questions that came in. So yeah, you guys live stream us, start a watch party, ask questions. So we have two questions that came across. First question is, how do we begin pushing for a more participatory society? Great question.
Well, first of all, I'm interested in what you say about this, but first of all, the key word is participate, because I think a lot of people, you know, have given up, or they're participating in a really negative way. And so, you know, those of us that are fortunate get to go to college. We no longer teach kind of a liberal arts education as a foundation so that people know how to think and get access to that multidisciplinary train of thought. And then we get out of college and hardly ever read a book, right? And education is an ongoing process in life. So I would say participate and educate yourself and get creative. I mean, you know, the sky's the limit. Just if you've got an idea, pursue it. I mean, it's not totally profound, but.
You want to hear my crazy idea on this? Can we throw it out there?
Yeah.
All right. I think there should be a mandatory, like every single person when you graduate high school, there should be like a community corps where you have to spend 2 years serving the country.
That's fantastic.
In any capacity, it's paid for. We put a ton of money into it. And because why should an 18-year-old, first of all, be making any type of life decisions around what they want to do? I think it should be compulsory that every single person has to serve the country for 2 years, and they need to learn about the government. They need to work for parts of the government. They're like literally, and you could have tons of these different areas. It could be in campaigns. I don't even know exactly how you do it, but it should be mandatory service to the country for 2 years. Yeah,
actually, it'd be good job training for many people too.
I think it would be amazing if we did that. That's my first. That's. I have a bunch of ideas, but I've been thinking that for a while. that, you know, it's funny, when I was 20 years old, I went on a trip around the world, and I went on this cruise ship called Semester at Sea around the world. And we went all over the world, and I went to India, and I went to an orphanage, a Dalit orphanage in southern India. And I was 20, right? And I had never in my life seen, like, Dalits are the untouchables. It's the most like that's their own civil rights movement in India. For those who don't know, it's like they're the lowest of low. Murdering them is not a big deal. They're like, the amount of rape and murder in that caste, because the caste system is like unspeakable. And I went to an orphanage of these children who were part of that caste, and I actually spent the night in one of their villages. And I remember thinking, I said, every single child in America should have to come see this and experience this to understand the life that they have. And what was funny is, sorry,
you don't have to go to India to experience that.
No, I know. You know, that's obviously an extreme. You could do it here. Go to the Appalachians. Go to these poor parts of the cities you live in, and go force those people. If you live in the fancy part of town, you're going to go work in the worst school districts and volunteer 2 years of your life. I think that, like, if people were doing that consistently, and adults were doing that, you know, like retired people were doing it, I think empathy is lacking, and because we have so much lacking empathy, we won't compromise. We won't collaborate, and people don't want to participate because they're like, I'll just get on my phone and screw around on the internet and go back to my bubble and not worry about the world that's around me. You know what I mean?
So we have an empathy deficit disorder.
That's amazing. I love that. That's so true.
I'm interested in the question, and I want to pose it back to the person who asked. Do they have a suggestion? So while we're talking, see if they come back. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, whoever asked that question, what's your suggestion? And the next question we have is, the COVID pandemic has now become a bipartisan issue. How do we get back from that?
Back from it being a
how do you make
it a politicized issue?
Yeah, how do you make it a healthcare issue versus a political issue?
A lot of people are going to have to die.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I unfortunately, and I'm extremely high risk. I mean, my rheumatologist told me if I'm exposed, I'll probably go in 3 days, right? And so first thing I did when it hit was write my will. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to die for us to really come to grips with it. And the thing is, if we don't have structural change, you know, there's going to be a next COVID. Absolutely.
Right.
This
is like a dress rehearsal, right? If you think about it, right? It's not really that. It's, what is it? Probably 0.5% death rate, 0.3% is the death rate, which is high when you're talking about billions of people. But that's not, it could be way, way worse if this was had a much more, you know, like stronger viral impact, or the death rate was higher. And so, to your point, John, who was here yesterday, who is my stepfather, he's the principal scientist at Abbott Labs. You know, he made the same point. He said, listen, when people's friends start dying, when they start knowing people, and it's not just some guy in the news. When the teachers start getting sick, when you can't go to the hospital because there's too much, and I don't think we're far from that right now. When those things happen, I think that people's attitudes might change. Hopefully those things don't. I mean, hopefully we're wrong. Hopefully this thing isn't bad. But, you know, we're here in Texas. I'll tell you, you know, it's funny, Toni, I moved here 3 years ago from California. And I said this to my friend today. I said, the behavior I saw here, the people walking around without masks and being close to each other. And someone said to me, oh, COVID's over. And I said, it was the first time I fell out of love with living in Texas, because I love Texas. But, you know, coming from California, I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on with people? Even if you don't think it's true, you don't still know. The science has not been proven yet. So you should probably play it safe. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, there's a great meme going around that wearing a mask is not a matter of personal freedom. It's an IQ test, which is so true. But no, not wearing a mask can equate to murder when you think about it. I mean, it's horrifying.
What about when people wear masks in their cars, though? I mean, that's kind of overkill, if you ask me, because you can't get it in your car.
Oh, it's a harmless perversion. So that is.
You're incredible. The response from them was that they loved my suggestion of community service for 2 years. And Toni, you were right. The key word is participation and awareness. So oh, go ahead.
No, I'm happy I'm right about something.
No, you're amazing. So we're coming up towards the end of the show here. And so I just wanted to ask you, like, you've been an entrepreneur and a business leader and a business person and thought leader for so long and spent your entire career doing all these amazing things. What, if you had to give like advice to business leaders or entrepreneurs, what would be your best piece of advice to give entrepreneurs and business leaders on how to approach the world we live in today?
Well, I wasted a lot of my career holding other people in such high self-esteem and lacking confidence in my perspectives and opinions. And I think the first thing is to trust your instinct, and your opinion and your ideas are just as valuable as anyone else's. But I'll give you an anecdote from when I was a kid. I was a professional tennis player until I blew my knees out at 16. And one of the things that people used to comment about me is that I was focused not on getting to the ball, but where the ball was going to be. And I would really pay attention to how they even prepared for their swing. And then I would anticipate the trajectory of where the ball was going to go. So don't focus on, staying on the ball, focus on where it's going to be. I think that's the best advice I could give.
Oh, I love that so much. That's why we're talking about dystopia, darn it.
Yeah.
We're too early, Toni. We got to fix the problems.
So how much longer do we have?
We got a couple more minutes. You want?
Okay,
you got any questions?
Yeah, for you.
All right, go for it.
As a kid, what was your earliest entrepreneurial idea?
Well, I used to have, before my most entrepreneurial ideas came when I used to walk my dog when I was probably 8. I used to think of inventions, which I think that's kind of an entrepreneurial way of being, when you're inventing and thinking of things that don't exist. But my first business was when I was 9 years old. My grandparents went to Italy and they came back with I want to say a pound of chocolate. It was 5 pounds of chocolate. And they gave me and my brother 5 pounds of chocolate that they got in Europe. And we broke it up into maybe 20 pieces and we put it in a little bag and we went and sold it for $0.25 on the bus. So I sold, yeah, because I used to ride the bus to school. So we sold the candy for $0.25. And so I got maybe, $0.25 times 20 is $4. So then I went to the it was CVS, right? The pharmacy. And I took the $4 and I bought a bunch of more candy. And basically within a matter of I don't know, a week or two, I made my mom take me to Smart Final and I was buying boxes of candy. And I think I turned that bar of chocolate into, I was 9, I was in 4th grade. My brother and I turned it into, I think, $100.
Wow.
And this is us selling candy on the bus and on the playground. Now, this is where the story actually gets interesting. So we had socks filled with Jolly Ranchers and all these different candies. I had 25, I was a total drug dealer of candy in my elementary school. I literally had a duffel bag filled with these boxes of Boston baked beans and gobstoppers and you name it, blow pops, all these different candies and stuff that wouldn't melt. And so I don't know, I guess some kid got in trouble. They came home, they spent all their lunch money on my candy and they told the principal. And this is actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, this is my first run-in with compliance. So being from the mortgage industry, this is my first experience of being regulated. And so I can't believe I never thought about that. So I get called, my mom gets called to the principal's office. I get called to the principal's office, and my principal totally shut down my candy operation.
Oh my God.
That was the end of it. Yeah. The regulators came in, they shut the bank down.
You should have stayed with the bus. Better distribution, concentration of your audience.
Toni, go big or go home.
You're forever going to be known as the candy man.
Yeah, so that's my first entrepreneur. What about you? What was yours?
Well, I got my start in the bottle business at 3 years old. I figured out that I could collect bottles and redeem them for 5 cents at the local ice house, and then I expanded my operations to something very new in 1964, which was an apartment complex. So as they were building the apartment complex, all these workers would, leave their bottles all over. And so then I graduated at 5. I got into the cattle business because my parents wouldn't let me have a pet. So one night at dinner, I saved the T-bone, buried it, and watered it for months because I was going to grow my own cow. So I was a little misguided. And then I got distracted because I had a spat with my dad, and I decided that I was going to run away. So I went in the garage, got a shovel, went in the backyard, and started digging my way to China. And my mom, bless her heart, came out and dug with me. Anyway, and then she finally said to me, so we're gonna dig a hole and go all the way to China, but what makes you think you're not gonna fall out into the universe?
Yeah.
At which point I said, well, what time is dinner? So some of my ideas were off the wall, but I had initiative. I mean, growing my own cow was misguided, but we were learning how to grow things in school.
Yeah, that's super entrepreneurial. You tried to actually grow. You were ahead of, what's the name of that company that makes beef that's really famous now, that they make like fake organic beef? They went public this year. Oh man, I'm blanking on their name. It's like you know what I'm talking about? It's like the pea. It's like, yeah, it's like pea made beef. Anyway, I'll remember that.
Really well. There's the future.
Yeah, like beef in a petri dish. Well, so Toni, where can people find you? Where can our audience find you if they want to connect with you?
Next door to you.
Email me and I'll go knock on her door.
I'm in Austin, and I founded and run a company called AmeriCatalyst, and I on the website AmeriCatalyst.com.
Cool. And can they find you on LinkedIn as well?
Yeah, I'm not as active as I should be on LinkedIn.
Okay, cool.
And lately I've been tweeting a lot, which is really bad because I'm too impulsive.
What's your tweet account?
At Toni Moss.
My website is therealdarius.com, which I modeled after our president, but
as opposed to the fake.
No, I'm like the real Donald Trump. So hey, Toni, thank you so much for being on the show. This is so much fun.
Yeah, well, I look forward to our meeting next week.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's have some coffee talk, and we'll have you back on the show. We could talk more. When we get closer to election, we can really get down and dirty. We can throw some mud at the politics that are happening. Yeah,
it's getting old though.
No, it is. It's tiring, and hopefully these politicians on both sides of the fence can get their shit together and start leading and doing their job. But guys, thank you so much for joining us. Toni, you're a saint for putting up with me and my neighbor and being such a great neighbor. I love you.
All right. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody who's on.
Yeah, guys, check out Toni at AmeriCatalyst.com. And guys, have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.